Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered, the podcast that takes the mystery out of commercial real estate and makes it accessible for everyone. I'm Caleb David, a broker, investor, and community builder with over a decade of experience helping businesses and individuals bring their visions to life. Here we break down the market, share expert insights, and talk about the opportunities that commercial real estate creates for businesses and communities alike. No fluff, no gatekeeping, just real, unfiltered conversations that empower you to navigate the space with confidence. So whether you're an investor, a business owner, or simply curious about commercial real estate, welcome. Let's dive in. Well, welcome everybody to Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered. I'm excited to have our guest, Jeremy Goodrich, with us today to talk about all things commercial real estate insurance, how to talk to investors and business owners for them to know how they need to be covered and what they could be missing. So I want to introduce Jeremy to you today. Jeremy is the co-founder and owner of Shine Insurance Agency, where he serves as a commercial real estate insurance advisor. With a background in education and passion for simplifying complex issues and concepts, Jeremy transitioned from being an elementary school teacher, and I'm looking forward to hearing about that, to becoming a trusted resource for real estate investors looking to understand and optimize their insurance coverage. And at Shine Insurance, Jeremy helps clients navigate all the intricacies of commercial real estate insurance, and there's a lot, ensuring that they are protected, informed, and financially secure. He's also the host of the REI Clarity podcast, which we'll hear about, and manages a YouTube channel dedicated to educating viewers on insurance. So Jeremy, welcome to the show. I'm glad we got to connect. We've had a few back and forths on scheduling, so I'm excited that you are here. So why don't you share a little bit about your background and kind of, someone who later in life made a switch in your career similar to what I did. I'd love to hear a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, Caleb, it's awesome to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Excited to talk to your listeners today. Just open up, pull back the curtain on a topic that can be confusing, that can be frustrating on all sorts of levels. And hopefully by the end of this conversation, there will be a lot more clarity about this important piece of the commercial real estate or the real estate journey and what they're doing. So you're exactly right. I studied in college to be a school teacher. I got my degree in art education. I was an art teacher for 5 years. I lived in Vermont at that time. And then I came back here to Bloomington, Indiana, southern Indiana, about an hour south of Indianapolis, where family was. It's funny, after you have kids, you kind of start to head back towards family for support. And that's exactly what we did. And I taught for 8 years as a third and fourth grade teacher here in Bloomington, Indiana. Lots of great stories there. I loved being a teacher. One big issue with teaching, as all teachers know, is it isn't the greatest for your pocketbook.
Yeah.
And at some point, I just couldn't continue to build the, credit card debt, and I just couldn't keep it all together. During that period of time, I had met my wife and partner and business partner. She was a third generation insurance agent. And the agency that her dad owned had just sold to a big kind of national hedge fund conglomerate. And she just wasn't down with kind of going down that road anymore. So the two of us talked, and ultimately we decided, look, why don't we take the teacher and me and the insurance agent and you and put it together and try and change the way people feel about insurance. And so that's what we did. In 2013, I switched to insurance. I knew nothing. Basically, I took the kids on a 3-day, 2-night trip to St. Louis, Missouri, which is about 4 hours away from here, for the last 3 days of the school year, ended the school year, got licensed in insurance the next week, and was doing, offering insurance the week after that. So that's the quick version of the story as to how I got here. And since I've been here for the last 10 years, real estate has really been at the center. I started with just homeowners and first-time home buyers, teaching them. That's what really got the YouTube channel going. And then it went to residential investment, smaller investment buildings, and then really commercial real estate investment, true or large portfolios all over the country. I've worked with folks that have thousands and thousands of units, hundreds of thousands of square feet, and help them with the insurance side of what they're doing. So that is the 4-minute version or the 2-minute version, or whatever it was, of my entire adult life. There you go.
No, I love it. And, I think what you touched on is the importance of education, taking the skills that you learned and had from your teaching days and bringing that into a topic that probably most people find very confusing and overwhelming. And that's one of the points of our podcast, is to make sure that that veil is taken back, and that everything that seems really scary can actually be something that can be helpful and very useful to them. So
Yeah,
jump in with
I
some
yeah,
questions.
before I just wanted to say, like, when I was teaching third and fourth grade, I was teaching arithmetic, right, or division, and
Yeah,
I always connected that because there was this thing where like the kids are like, well, what the heck? Like, I don't know, I don't care.
yeah,
Like, I don't even will I ever use this in my life? Like, how many times have you heard of your 10-year-old say, will I ever use this in my life, right? And you've got to figure out how to, make that interesting and how to say, look, I know it doesn't seem valuable right now, but when you need this skill, you'll be glad that you have it. And I
yeah,
think that that's really been used in the same way because insurance is that, right? It's like, I don't want to think about bad things happening to me. I don't want to think about someone suing me. I don't want to think about a fire happening in my property. But, that is why what we're doing is we're building that foundation so that when those things happen, you have the tools to be able to handle them. And insurance is a big part of that.
absolutely. And what do you find that some commercial real estate investors and businesses often, what are some of the mistakes that they make? What are some pitfalls and how can those be avoided?
Yeah, for commercial real estate investors, I think right now insurance is really tough.
Mhm.
And we can get into the history of that. I'd be happy to if you'd like me to. But essentially, insurance is really tough. And so one of the biggest mistakes I think they make is just incorrectly underwriting insurance in your pro forma when you're back a napkin penciling a deal and the seller says, well, it's going to be $300 a unit for this apartment complex or whatever, and you pencil it like that. You put your LOI out, you get the signed PSA, you're deep into due diligence, and suddenly insurance agents are saying, well, you said $300 a door, it's going to be more like $800 a door.
Yeah,
And suddenly you're getting crushed and you've already got hard money involved and everything else. So I think that's the biggest mistake that folks make. And then the other big mistake is simply just going for the cheapest option.
yeah,
Insurance is just like everything else. Oftentimes cheap insurance is not good for you. It's just like sunscreen. If you go out and you went to a convenience store and there was a 2-gallon jug, a
yeah,
huge jug of sunscreen for $3. And
yeah,
then there was a small container of sunscreen for, $10. What would you buy? Well, inherently you would say, hey, I don't want to get burnt, right? 2 days ago, I got really burnt out on a lake fishing and I don't want to get burnt. I don't think that $3 2-gallon jug of sunscreen is really going to take care of me. I'm going to go with the $10 because my intuition says
mm,
this is something I should probably pay a couple dollars more. I think
yeah,
that people in the insurance world get sucked into that 2-gallon jug of sunscreen
yeah.
instead of doing the right thing.
Yeah, more is not always better, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's the quality of what's in there that really matters in the fine
hmm
print. And I would love to hear a little bit more about the history of insurance and why things are pretty tough right now.
So, insurance is basically a balance, right? Money coming in the front end and then money going out the back end. Now, insurance companies don't necessarily need to make money off of what's called underwriting, right? If they have $100,000 come in the front end and $100,000 go out the back end, that's actually okay for them. Insurance companies make their money the exact same way that banks make their money. They
Mhm.
make money off of investing your money
Yeah,
while they have it before they have to pay it out, right? And so these are the two factors that are happening. In the property insurance world, some of the biggest claims come from two things: big catastrophic losses, big fires, big storms, all that kind of stuff. And roofs, I mean, I would say is one of the biggest one and those two things are connected, right? You hear of hail chasing roofers, where a hailstorm comes through, suddenly there's roofers from all over telling everyone they can have a free roof. And in the commercial real estate world, it's a really big deal because my personal house, that roof replacement might be $10,000. Your 250 unit apartment complex, that roof replacement is $4 million,
right.
right? And so roof scenarios have become an epidemic as more and more roofers are getting better at finding hailstorms and then, replacing old roofs. Meanwhile, catastrophic storms and climate change are real. And so I think that has affected things. In 2022 through 2024, um, in 2021, property losses across the United States added up to about $6 billion.
Oh,
In 2022, they were $26 billion.
wow.
In 2023, they were $36 billion. So in 2022 and 2023, from 2021, it was a 6x, or that's not 6x, that's like 600x,
Yeah.
or I don't know, whatever. I
Yeah.
only taught elementary math, we're above my grade. But That's a lot of increase. And so insurance companies at the same time in 2022, the stock market, I don't know if you remember or not, but the stock market wasn't great in 2022. And so you had the perfect storm of these huge increases in losses
Mhm.
and a stock market that didn't make money for insurance companies, and they started getting scared. And
Yeah.
so what we saw in 2023 and 2024, on top of the fact that things were changing in the commercial property market as a whole, insurance companies were scared and they were losing money. And we shouldn't feel bad for them; they still have plenty of money. But it was they had left less money.
Right.
And so they started increasing premium. Now, there was one class of insurance business that was more problematic than
Mm.
any other class, period, across the property.
Wow.
It was apartments
Yeah.
and it was older apartments.
Okay.
Those older apartments, especially 70s apartments, had been losing insurance companies money for something like 10 quarters. I mean, just
Wow.
like years and years, apartments had been known as a loser.
Mhm.
Not that they're a loser as investments. I love apartments, but they were losers for insurance companies. And the insurance companies had been kind of tolerating it. And in 2022 and 2023, they just stopped tolerating it. And so that's the backstory with
Mm.
what we saw. And if you tried to invest in an older property in 2023 or 2024, insurance was one of the things that you were like, what the heck just happened?
Yeah.
And that is what happened.
Wow. And so definitely like wildfires and I know a lot of insurance companies are pulling out of certain areas. We've run into that here in Colorado. I know that's been the case in California.
Mhm.
So when you're working with clients, are you more of an insurance broker that kind of helps them find the right fit, or what's your approach to helping people find the right coverage?
Yeah, I'm an independent insurance broker, so that's exactly what I do. I have access to hundreds of insurance companies, and my job is to know the landscape of the market so that when someone comes to me with a business, whatever kind of business it is, or a property or whatever, I'm able to say, okay, I know enough about what's going on here to be able to go and find the top 5 or 6 companies to get them to battle for your business and ultimately to present to you, hey, here's the best solution. And I'm pretty sure it's the best solution out in the market.
Yeah.
Um, and so Colorado is a good example, Florida, California. I think Texas is one of the most interesting examples.
Mm.
They had that power grid freeze. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember that in
I do.
2021. At the time, the largest commercial property loss in the history of the United States, it was some couple billion, or I don't know what it was. But Texas insurance before that had been kind of in good shape. But what happened there would be familiar to any of your listeners in Florida because it happened to them in 2007, 2008. A big bad thing happened,
Yeah.
and all the insurance companies just took off.
Yeah.
They just said, we're out of here. We're not writing any new insurance or anything like that. And so Texas is now, there are properties in Dallas, Texas that in 2020, the insurance would have been, I don't know, $300 a unit for an apartment complex. And now it's $1,500, $1,600 a unit. And
Wow.
so, you're just seeing these dramatic differences in insurance costs. The good thing for Texas is we do see some softening, and
Mhm.
we've seen some softening across the market in 2025. So there's some hope.
Yeah.
But that's just what we've been dealing with in the property insurance world.
Yeah. And so if someone is having an insurance issue and they're having trouble finding insurance in these states that you've mentioned, what are some backup options for them? I mean, is it just kind of your SOL, or, how do you find solutions for them in those cases?
Yeah, there's always a solution. I mean, it's just a matter of what the cost is going to be. And I think if someone is, experiencing getting canceled by their insurance company, which kind of freaks people out, right? Like you get a letter and
Yeah.
it's like, hey, we've decided not to insure properties in your area
Yeah.
anymore. And at the renewal date, we'll be canceling your policy. And you're thinking, man, I mean, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And so, if you're with, a State Farm or some of those Super Bowl commercial companies,
Yeah.
you're just going to have to go look elsewhere, right? And to me, an independent insurance advisor is your best solution. So you can look locally and just Google independent insurance agent, your city, and then look for reviews
Yeah.
and then make that phone call, see if you get a good conversation someone. I feel like if you have a ten minute conversation with an insurance advisor and you feel dumber at the end of it
Right.
than you felt at the beginning, you've got the wrong person,
Yeah.
right? You got
Yeah.
to have someone who can explain things.
Yeah.
And so they can go out and look and, find the best solution for you.
Yeah. So, one of the questions I had as well is, what are some of the financial consequences for somebody who's underinsured?
Yeah. So this happens all the time, and it usually is like you were offered a policy. One policy was $5,000, another one was $4,000, and you're like, "Hey, I'm going to go with the $4,000 policy." Then you turn around, and you have a claim. Let's say the claim is $100,000 of damage to your property, right? A good insurance policy
Mhm.
should pay out that $100,000 of damage minus whatever your deductible is. So
Right.
if you have a $5,000 deductible, you would expect that at the end of the scenario, ultimately, you were reimbursed $95,000 of the $100,000 loss.
Yeah.
The only policies that are actually going to do that are good ones.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important foundation to start from, right? There are so many pieces to an insurance policy that can take away some of that coverage. And one of them is what you just described, being underinsured. So there's something called a co-insurance clause. You don't have to really remember that, it's just nerdy.
Yeah.
But essentially, it says if you do not insure to the full value of your property,
Mhm.
then we're going to penalize you in a claim scenario, no matter how small that claim is, for the percent you underinsured.
Got it.
So let's say you got a $10 million property. It would cost $10 million to replace this, commercial property, right? And you insure it for $5 million. It's like, hey, that was great. I insure it for 5 million bucks. My insurance premium is a ton cheaper. Am I really going to have a total loss on this property? Probably not. 5,000 is pretty good, right? And that's the thinking, and it really does make sense. The problem is insurance companies have figured out that people do that and now have a co-insurance clause. And so in that exact scenario, even though it's only $100,000 loss, maybe you had a small fire in one unit, and it only cost 100,000. A part of that claim process is that the adjuster, the person from the insurance company whose job it is to figure this stuff out, says, well, it would cost $10 million to replace this building. You only insured it for 5 million.
Mhm.
That means you insured for 50% of what you should have insured for.
Mm.
As a part of our claim process, we are going to take the amount of loss and multiply it times 50% and pay that out to you.
Yeah.
And so instead of paying you $100,000, they're now only paying you $50,000 minus your $5,000 deductible. You're getting paid out $45,000 in a claim scenario instead of the
Right.
100,000 that
Yeah.
you thought you would. So that's just one example of how insurance policies have exclusions, have limitations, have things that change the coverage.
Yeah.
And when you buy a cheaper insurance policy, a lot of times, you're setting those things up, and underinsuring inherently just burns you in a claim scenario.
Yeah. So essentially, you're out $55,000 in a
Yeah,
scenario like this. And I think something that's relevant right now is that we're not seeing prices of restoration or construction going down. If anything, if the tariffs go through, we're going to see an increase in that. So it adds that additional potential risk
yeah,
of being uninsured. And if you don't have, a solid, slush fund for emergencies like this, then lots of times I think you get stuck in a really bad position.
yeah. And it's just, having that relationship with your advisor again, right? Like someone could be listening to this podcast and being like, all right, I'm getting some knowledge. Great. Like now
Yeah.
you understand the co-insurance clause in a way that
Yeah.
maybe you didn't before you listened to this show, right? And having some basic knowledge is important, but I don't go to my lawyer and say, hey, I wrote up this lease. I think it's pretty great.
Yeah.
Will you just take a look at it and tell me what thing's right or wrong,
Yeah.
right? Your lawyer would laugh at you.
Yeah.
You trust your lawyer to go do that thing. You don't go to your accountant and say, "Hey, I did my taxes. Will you just take a quick look and make sure?"
Right.
That you go to your accountant, you say, "Hey, can you do my taxes?" And I think that we see insurance advisors as this. I hear all the time like someone's like, "Hey, I got a proposal from somebody else. I'd like you to get me a proposal too, and then I'm going to take a look at both of them and see what's right and wrong." It's like, well. are you an expert in the insurance world? Like you've just
Right.
put yourself in the position of expert at
Right.
some point, and I think any business owner understands this or should understand this. I think it's the key point of owning a business, no matter what kind it is, and that is you have to find people to surround yourself with that you trust and then trust them, right?
Yeah.
It's the who, not how. It's the finding the people around you that you trust. We understand that inherently about lawyers, about doctors, about accountants. Sometimes we struggle with that with property managers, sometimes for good reason. And we oftentimes struggle with that with insurance advisors as well.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. And I think it's really important for people to find those people and to interview. And I think the great tip that you had is ask people that check reviews, and just the barometer of, if you feel more informed than we get off, then that's probably a good sign. If you feel a little bit more
Mhm.
confident, but how can investors ensure that their coverage, covers any exposed risk?
Well, I think the first thing starts with your building coverage for your building. That's generally the most valuable part of a real estate scenario. And, if you really want to understand, ask a builder, say, hey, how much would it cost to rebuild this place?
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
generally, we say right now, it depends on what part of the country, a lot of variable factors. But it used to be that a base was $100 a square foot
Yeah.
for a lot of types of commercial real estate. I think that unless you're talking self-storage or large industrial or something like that, that number doesn't really jive anymore.
No way.
I think 140 is the bottom of, an apartment type place. And if you've got single family, duplex, triplex, quads, then you're probably more like 175. And again, in Colorado, it's probably higher
Yeah.
than it is in, somewhere in the Midwest.
Yeah.
So the first thing is just make sure you're insuring to the value of the building for the reasons like I described with the co-insurance clause, or at least close to that, understanding that. So the building coverage would be the most important thing.
Yeah.
Um, a couple of, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was one of the questions just came to mind is, what's your recommendation if somebody's had a building for a while and they you need to relook at their insurance? What's the best way that you feel like they should, where should they go to get that valuation of what that building cost? Yes, you can talk to somebody about replacement contractor about replacement cost, but are there other professionals that you would recommend?
I mean, generally, your insurance advisor is probably besides an actual contractor, your advisor is the best person to talk to. I mean, we have software that we put together a replacement cost estimate, and generally we can print that out and send it to you. And if you really wanted to get into the weeds of it, usually when I have people wanting to get into the weeds of a replacement cost estimate, they think it's too high and
Mhm.
want to find a way to bring it down. And as they go through it, it ends up making it go up. And so, I think that you can certainly do that though, is look at the replacement cost estimate. But well, that would be the best way to do it. Just ask
Okay,
your insurance advisor about it.
great. Yeah, and we kind of talked a little bit about insurance rates rising. Are there any other factors other than we've already covered that you think maybe are contributing to some of the increases?
Well, one of the interesting things that's happening right now is things around liability. Liability insurance is for bad things that happen to other people because of you. So if you own a commercial, you own a retail building, you've got a grocery store in it, someone goes in to shop at the grocery store, slips and falls, hires their favorite personal injury attorney and sues you for $100,000 or whatever. They're going to sue the grocery store, yes, but they're also going to sue you, the building owner, right?
Yeah.
And the property manager and everybody else.
Yeah.
And so liability insurance is coverage for when you get sued by someone for bad things that happen, right? And it provides lawyers and provides a lot of things.
Yeah.
The litigious nature of the United States has been known for a long time, right? We're the most litigious country in the world, and a big part is this relationship between lawyers and insurance companies. It's sort of a chicken and the egg. If insurance companies didn't exist, lawyers wouldn't, frivolously sue
Right.
because people just don't really have the money. But if insurance companies didn't exist, then there wouldn't be anybody to cover the cost of lawyers
Right.
frivolous suing. And I think that the current climate has we're just in a divisive climate in a way that we haven't been before, and a litigious climate that's being sort of shown as the way to do things in a way that never has been before. And so we're seeing, just astronomical numbers. There was recently another one of these like McDonald's spilled a hot coffee on your lap and sued for $50 million, and the person won, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think inherently that's bad for everyone. I guess it's not bad for that person who won, although it may really ruin their life. Lots of money at one time tends to do bad things. But that would be the other piece is just litigation and what's going on in the litigious world. Property coverage is always, it's already expensive. What we don't need is liability coverage to start getting more expensive too. And now we've got both sides.
Yeah, and I know a lot of times tenants have their own liability insurance. If it's a multi-tenant building, it's not covered by the landlord. So, what advice would you have for them? I mean, obviously in leases, it puts in there, what kind of coverage they want, to name the landlord as additionally insured. But what are some tips or tricks that you or conversations you have with tenants when you're talking about liability insurance for inside their suite?
Yeah, I mean, there's really two things you're trying to get. One is coverage for your own property, right? So if you're in a suite, you're a commercial, you're a business that's in there, and the building burns down, the owner of the building is not going to pay for your laptops. It's not going to pay for your desks, chairs, all your stuff. The owner of the building's only responsibility is the building. So one piece is you should make sure that you have your own business, personal property coverage for your stuff. But as far as liability coverage, I mean, I think a solid foundation is 500 to usually $1 million for a commercial building. If you're a residential tenant, it might be a little bit lower than that, maybe 300,000 or 500,000. But just making sure that your liability coverage is solid,
Mhm.
because people do sue a business more often than they sue an individual. So if you go over to a friend's house, you're having a couple of beers or whatever, something bad happens, you are less likely to sue or get sued if you were the host of that party
Yeah,
than if you're a business owner who people perceive as having lots of money.
yeah.
And so, you should have liability limits that reflect that.
Yeah, awesome. So, are there some economic and market trends that you're seeing that are kind of contributing, and influencing commercial property insurance costs?
Market trends, not I mean, commercial insurance, especially commercial property insurance, is kind of insulated from, market value, from tax valuation, from a lot of the things that we talk about on the commercial real estate or the real estate side that you talk about in a lot of your other episodes, right? Like in essence, insurance is fairly insulated because our entire idea is how much would it cost to rebuild this thing, right? And so I wouldn't say that insurance is following market trends. I think insurance is influencing market trends,
Mm,
as is property taxes, right? Property taxes and insurance are almost creating a market trend issue where you're seeing less transaction. Although transactions are up in 2025, I don't know if you've seen that, if you're seeing that as well, but which is really, really good news, right? But insurance and taxes were affecting transaction value, and so I would say we're less following the market trends than we are, unfortunately, creating the market trends.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I can definitely attest to that. It does make it higher taxes, higher insurance cost. It does make it more difficult for especially a smaller business to be able to get up and running.
Mhm.
So, how do you think that investors should factor in risk into their kind of long-term strategies? Some people are holding properties just long enough to not have to pay the capital gains, right, and 1031 it to something else. But if someone's having this is more of a long-term strategy, how do they factor risk in?
Well, I love how you asked the question. I think that understanding the foundation of how our brains work and how risk applies to the way we make decisions every day is a really, really important thing, right? There's risk in real estate. There's risk in putting a piece of broccoli on your 4-year-old child's plate at night, right? These are different risks, but in essence, they're the same thing, right? The more we understand something, the more capable we are of stepping into a more risky place because we have the knowledge. I mean, I guess it's how you define the word risk. It's almost not even more risky at that point, right? The more understanding you have, the further out in the circle your comfort zone is, and the further away the risk zone is. So I guess the first thing I would say is just getting your understanding, listening to podcasts like this, doing underwriting, underwriting a lot, filling out pro formas on a bunch of things so that you start to get comfortable with numbers, considering investing maybe closer to home than further away, investing in markets that you really understand as opposed to markets that you don't understand. If you're not knowledgeable about real estate at all, maybe do an LP deal or a little JV deal where you know saddle up next to someone who has a bunch of experience, right? I mean, experience is one of the killers of risk.
Yeah.
Right? The more experience that exists, the better. So if you're listening to this episode and you're not very experienced, you're trying to build a foundation of experience, then your number one question is, who can I find
Yeah.
who has experience and will let me intern with them or invest a small amount with them or do some boots on the ground work and just go find. I mean, I've seen so many people in the larger commercial real estate world that got in not with any money, but just they found a deal. They
Yeah.
brought a deal to someone with money, right? And they were like, "Hey, I think
Yes.
this is a pretty good deal. Like I've underwritten, I've got a bunch of reps. A bunch of it was junk. I found this one. I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah.
You've got money, you know, or you have the ability to raise money. You've
Yeah.
got a property management team. You've got a construction team, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's you're saddling up next to people with more experience. So that's a big piece of it is how can I get, you know, specialized people who know what they're doing and I trust, and people with more experience than me, making sure that, you know, I'm saddled up next to them is what's really going to limit risk the most.
Yeah. I think that, that's such a great point because people often think that you've got to have this wad of cash, but if you're resourceful and you're willing to dig in and do the work, if you can source that deal, there's usually a way for you to get involved in that deal. And if you're a commercial broker, if
Hmm.
you find the deal, put your commission into it. And that shows your
Yeah.
investors that I've got some skin in the game and that,
Yeah.
I'm willing to take some risk as well with you. So we've kind of talked a little bit about kind of like the entry level, investor right now, but for more of your high level investors, what kind of key risk mitigation factors do they take into consideration?
Yeah, I think it's really having, you know, as people get more into it, and inherently happens, whether it's by hiring a property manager or whatever, but really building out your risk assessment of what your portfolio looks like. And that is, you know, if you have property management, you know, if you're vertically integrated and you have your own property management, then it's even more important that you build out the systems and strategies that mitigate risks. And that starts at the very beginning. You know, larger investors have a lot more on the line. I was talking with an investor the other day who was buying a large property in Texas, in Houston, Texas, and had a lot of properties in other places in the country. Very wealthy, very large portfolio, but had just made a mistake on getting involved in this property, was deep in the process, and called me and was like, "Hey, insurance is becoming a big issue. Can you help me solve the problem?" And I immediately was like, "Look, here's your insurance number. You're way off from it."
Yeah.
Long story short, he ended up pulling out of the deal, not just for insurance, but a variety of things. And he lost $300,000 hard money, right?
Wow.
And for him, he was comfortable doing that. I mean, he wasn't comfortable, but
Right.
like he was capable.
Right.
You know, but I think that, you know, having understood the market, that was a misunderstanding of the market, right? So
Yeah.
wherever in that person's checklist, in their process, in their workflows, it's just like you get on an airplane. I flew a small plane recently. I only did it once and I was like, okay, I'm done. I did like I mean, I wasn't the only one flying, right? Like there was a real pilot there too.
Yeah.
But like what struck me was the checklists, right? And if anyone's ever taken a lesson, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, it's checklist after checklist after checklist. You got to go through this, you got to check the fin, you got to check that. And I walked away just like this is what everyone should be doing when it comes to risk mitigation. If you know that if anything goes wrong, you start falling dead out of the air 3,000 feet down to the ground, you have an approach that you take. And I think too many of us stray too far from that because we don't realize, you know, that's such a visual risk that we can see in front of us. And so, you know, the biggest investors have their systems down. They have their checklist. They have their people they trust. I keep coming back to it, you know, the people you trust and your systems. And so if you're new at this, the biggest thing I can say is get a piece of software like Trello, or there's lots of like, you know, just project management software, and start writing down every step you're doing. Okay, here's how I'm underwriting. Okay, now here's how I write an LOI. You know, here's how I test the market. The whole thing. I think the better your systems and strategies are, that's what I see. the bigger investors do. And they're also not, nickel and diming. I've never had a large investor say, send me a quote, and I'm going to have someone else send me a quote, and
Right.
I'm going to decide which one's better because they realize they're not the expert.
Yeah, it's building that team and community around yourself that you know when to go to whom. One of the things that we did here in Colorado Springs is we worked with our local city EDC and chamber and came up with roadmaps for businesses so that they know that if I'm a salon and I need to open up, here's the path and here's who I need to speak with as we
Yeah.
go. And so we're really working hard to try to make Colorado Springs one of the most business friendly cities in the country, and we're
Mhm.
accomplishing that through organizations like the Small Business Development Center that
Yep.
can really help people a lot of the times in with these questions. And I tell clients all the time, ask questions. If you think it's a
Mhm.
dumb question, it's probably valid. And I think once you don't know until you know, and
Mhm.
once you start building out that team, I think it makes a huge difference for future deals.
Yeah, I think those checklists or that small business checklist that you created, I think if you went to the history of every single one of those, there would be a story of a mistake, right?
100%.
Like everything on a checklist comes from the story of a mistake. And
Yes.
that's the value of being able to get that from someone else is like, hey, here's a list of 35 mistakes essentially that I made. And as you check each one of these as you go
Yes.
through starting your business, you've avoided that mistake, you
Yeah.
know?
What do you think are some must-have policies? I know there's different types of coverages and all of that. So what kind of must-have policies for commercial real estate owners would you recommend?
Yeah, well, let me just give you the quick, it's like we talked a lot about property. So, number one is property. Do you have any property, whether it's a building or your stuff? Do you have coverage for those things? Your tractor, your equipment in the back of your truck, all that kind of stuff. Property coverage is number one. Number two is liability coverage. That is for bad things that happen to other people. I talked about physical injuries, but there's also like bad advice. You're a real estate, you have real estate E&O, coverage, which is for if someone perceives you to have given them bad advice, they sue you, you have insurance coverage for that. So liability coverage, there's all sorts of kinds of liability coverage to consider depending on your business.
Yeah.
Workers' compensation coverage is really important if you have any employees. Lots of commercial real estate investors don't have employees in their entity that owns the building, but maybe they have a construction company, maybe they have a property management company. And so workers' comp is for injuries that happen to your employees. That's pretty important. Commercial auto, of course, whether one thing that's not well known is there's something called hired and non-owned auto, where if you are driving your personal car in a business name, you get in an accident, it becomes known that you were driving for business. It's possible that your
Mm,
personal insurance will decline to cover that claim. In that scenario, your business would need to have coverage, and
mm,
that's called hired and non-owned auto. So even if you don't have any vehicles in the business name, that's an important coverage. But obviously, if you do have a fleet or something like that, it would be a key coverage, probably the most important coverage.
right.
There's commercial umbrella coverage, which is excess liability coverage on top of the liability coverage that you have. And there's a whole lot of other smaller things, but I would say those are the biggest things. I guess I would finish with key person life insurance. It's a pretty good idea as you're
Yeah.
considering what would happen if you were to pass away. There's a big business owner in our town recently who unfortunately passed away in an airplane accident. And so now all of the other investors in that organization are doing business with his grieving wife because
Yeah.
that's the way it turned out. And so I think that there's a lot of things you can do to avoid that. But do you have that plan in place for what happens? If something bad happens to you. So
Yeah.
those would be like the highest level, just types of insurance that I would think
Yeah,
of.
and I was going to ask you about the umbrella insurance because that's something that I feel it's important for me to carry, even
Mhm.
though it's a small business and it is what it is. But what are some of the benefits of that? Obviously, there's additional coverage, but are there any other benefits that you could share?
Yeah, so the most important part is the additional coverage, right? If you have $500,000 of primary general liability coverage, someone sues you for $2 million, your business assets and potentially even your personal assets could be exposed at that point. So an umbrella is just an inexpensive way to double your coverage up, right? As a personal and for your home and auto, if you have any kind of wealth at all, I would suggest you have at least $1 million umbrella over the top of your primary home and auto insurance. But for business owners, it's a good idea too for the same reason. It also adds some breadth, not to get into, I won't get into the weeds of it all, but the way the language of an umbrella is set up, it also is more likely to cover things that maybe aren't covered elsewhere.
Okay.
But in general, the way to think about it is just extra liability coverage.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that feedback. Well, we're going to start winding down because I actually feel like I had a lot more questions to ask that we're probably not going to get to, but I want to respect your time and our
Sure.
listeners' time. But one of the things I always ask, one question before we kind of get ready to sign off and share your socials and all of that,
Yeah.
is, another podcaster brought this up to me, asked me this question on their podcast and said I could steal it. And so the question is simply this: you're going out to eat. There's a table for four. You're taking one of those seats. And who are the other three people, dead or alive, that you would like to have at that table?
Huh. Well, I've got a grandpa Zavo that I've never met, but came over from Eastern Europe. I guess he was like a pretty interesting personality. So I guess a grandparent who could let you know a little bit about yourself would be pretty interesting. I mean, I am. I mean, I guess this is a little, but like Barack Obama, I think would be a pretty amazing person to sit across the table from. Just because I was so inspired by that particular person and the way that they went about
Yeah.
leadership in our country. What do I have? I have one more seat. Well, I've got to invite my wife because if she's not there, then I
And if
really
Barack's there,
have.
she's going to have some conversation too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like one of the things I've noticed is if I do anything alone, there's no one to share the story with,
Ooh,
right?
I love
And so I think that having her there, so whatever the heck happened at that table with Zavo, I don't know what Zavo's politics would have been. So it may have been a like really poor choice of combined people.
that.
But I definitely think that it would be important to have my wife there so we could laugh
Love it.
about it later.
I love that. Well, awesome. Jeremy, where can people find you? What do you want to promote? Where can people start following your podcast? I know you've got some changes going on there, but how can people find you to get a consult, to get
Yeah.
some professional advice?
Yeah, sure. So shineinsurance.com is the place to go to, I think, or go to our YouTube channel, which is Shine Insurance. Um, there's a lot of advice about commercial real estate investing, but and about insurance as well. So those would be the two places. Socials, I'm out there as well. But yeah, more than happy to help. I personally generally work with pretty large portfolios, but I can direct you the right person, help you through that.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time. We'll have all of your links in the show notes for our listeners. And I just really appreciate your time and expertise and look
Caleb,
forward to further conversations.
yeah, Caleb, absolute pleasure. It was great to come on. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, have a great one, everyone. We'll be in touch on the next episode. That's a wrap on this episode of Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered. I hope you found value in today's conversation and feel more confident about navigating the world of commercial real estate. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who could benefit from these insights. You can connect with me, Caleb David, and the team at David Commercial Real Estate. Just check the show notes for more information. Thanks for listening, and remember, creating space is more than just real estate. It's about building community. See you next time.